Say I'm Isabella Sinclair, 34 years old, an art curator in New York City, and for as long as I can remember, I've been the unwavering protector of my younger sister Bianca. Our childhood in the leafy suburbs of Connecticut looked picture perfect on the outside, our mother's constant fussing over appearances, and our father's quiet presence at the dinner table. But beneath the curated family portraits was a constant push for perfection that seemed to weigh heavier on me than on Bianca. She was always the favored one, the golden child with her infectious laughter and sunny blonde hair. I never minded it. In fact, I reveled in watching her shine. We shared everything, secrets whispered beneath blanket forts, dreams scrawled in diaries, tears spilled over broken hearts, and laughter so fierce it left our stomachs aching. I remember the little ways I protected her, stealing away the final piece of cake when mom wasn't looking, editing her college essays until dawn, and even skipping dates to be at her dance recitals. Being her big sister felt like my most sacred role, a purpose woven into the very fabric of my identity. Even as I navigated the cutthroat world of the art world, curating galleries, and living alone in my tiny Brooklyn apartment, my thoughts always circled back to Bianca. My phone was never on silent, not when she might need to talk at midnight about her fears, or call me to help her fix a problem I didn't even know existed. I was the quiet anchor, the calm voice that never wavered. But as Bianca grew into the poised woman she is now, I began to see subtle changes. I couldn't quite name new phrases, new clothes, an air of effortless sophistication that wasn't there before. I told myself it was just her blossoming a natural evolution that didn't mean I'd lose my place in her heart. After all, sisters are forever, at least, that's what I believed, with the kind of certainty only a devoted older sister could hold. We had been more than family. We were best friends, bound by laughter and tears. Or so I thought. My whole life, I had seen my worth in how I cared for her, how I always put her first. But, as I'll soon share with you, that selfless devotion would become my greatest blind spot, and the opening for a betrayal I never saw coming. So before you hear the rest of my story, tell me where you're from in the comments, and let me know if you've ever given so much of yourself to someone you love that you didn't notice the cracks forming until it was too late. As Bianca stepped deeper into her engagement with Lucas, I watched the slow erosion of the sister. I thought I knew a transformation so gradual, it felt like watching the tide slip away, leaving the shore exposed and raw. My mother had always believed in crafting the perfect image, but Lucas's family operated on a level beyond anything our suburban household had ever imagined, wealthy pedigreed, and with an elegance that was both intimidating and magnetic. Bianca, always the eager chameleon, began to mirror them in ways that made my heart ache. Our carefree coffee dates, once filled with spontaneous laughter, turned into stilted affairs, where she picked at her oat milk lattes and scrolled through her phone like the rest of the world had become far more interesting than my stories. She swapped her cozy sweaters for cashmere, her wide, carefree smile for a polite curve of the lips that seemed practiced rather than real. I tried to brush it off, telling myself it was just the normal evolution of adulthood, the way we all slip into new skins as we navigate our lives. But the hollow ache in my chest grew every time she brushed off my invitations with a breezy, "Next time, Issa," a promise I knew was already broken. My apartment, once her sanctuary from family pressures and boy troubles, no longer felt like a refuge for her. She would arrive late, leave early, and sometimes cancel altogether always, with a new excuse about Lucas's demanding schedule or some fancy event she'd been invited to. When she did come, she seemed distracted, her eyes flicking to her phone every few minutes. I tried to joke about it. "You're more glued to that thing than a teenage influencer," but the laughter that used to bubble up between us never materialized. Instead, there was a polite, dismissive chuckle that shut me out more than any slammed door ever could. She began to adopt their mannerisms, their conversations about luxury travel and exclusive dinner parties, conversations that I couldn't relate to no matter how hard I tried. She'd drop casual references to Aspen weekends and Hamptons retreats, and I found myself nodding along while the words barely made sense in my world of gallery openings and long nights prepping exhibitions. I clung to the belief that she'd come back to me, that this was just a phase that my sister, the girl who used to dance barefoot in our kitchen and snuggle up beside me to watch black and white movies, still existed beneath the polished facade. I remember one night in particular, sitting across from her at a sleek downtown bar. She'd chosen a place so upscale, I felt out of place in my well-worn jeans and museum badge lanyard. She looked like she belonged there every inch the poised fiancé. And as she talked about Lucas's latest business deal, I realized I'd never felt further away from her. I tried to tell her about a new exhibit I was curating, something I was so passionate about, I could barely keep it in. She smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. "That's great, Issa," she said, her voice polite, her fingers already typing a response to someone else. That was the night I knew deep down in my bones that something between us had shifted, perhaps forever. But even then, I refused to let go. I doubled down on my efforts to be there for her, to remind her that no matter how far she wandered into that glittering world, her big sister was still here. I'd send her funny memes we used to laugh over, suggest sister days that went unacknowledged, and even started learning about wine pairings and luxury brands, just so I'd have something to contribute when we did meet. Each time she brushed me off, it felt like a paper cut to the heart, tiny, almost invisible, but so persistent it began to sting every time I thought about her. If you've ever watched someone you love slip away piece by piece until they're a stranger in front of you, drop a comment and tell me about it. And if this resonates, hit that subscribe button. Your support fuels me to keep telling these raw, honest stories. I'll never forget the day Bianca's betrayal crystallized, turning my quiet heartbreak into something undeniable, a jagged edge that cut through the illusions I'd been clinging to for so long. It started with a casual coffee invitation, her bright text popping up on my phone, promising a catch-up chat and a chance to reconnect. I arrived at the little cafe we'd always loved, ordering her favorite lavender latte and settling into a window seat where the sun painted our reflections across the glass. I remember glancing up every time the door swung open, my heart fluttering with a hope that was already starting to feel foolish. When she finally walked in, she looked flawless in a tailored coat I'd never seen before. Her phone in hand, her smile polite but distant. She didn't even notice the latte I'd ordered for her until I pushed it across the table. "Oh, thanks," she said absently, tucking a strand of hair behind her ear and avoiding my gaze. I tried to fill the awkward silence with updates about my latest exhibit, but Bianca's responses were clipped, distracted. Finally, she cleared her throat and said she had something important to tell me. My mind raced. Maybe she was finally ready to let me back in to share her plans and fears, the way she always had. But her words weren't an invitation. They were a blow. "Lucas's sister, Veronica, is going to be my maid of honor," she said, her voice breezy, like this was just a minor update, rather than a complete rewriting of the future we'd always imagined together. I felt my stomach drop, but I managed to keep my smile in place, refusing to let her see how much it stung. "Of course," I said softly, even as my mind reeled. "I understand. Veronica's family, after all." Bianca seemed relieved by my quick acceptance, but her relief only deepened the ache in my chest. I'd spent my whole life making sure she felt safe, loved, and supported. Now I was nothing more than an afterthought. The days that followed were a blur of one-sided attempts to stay connected. I sent her links to bridesmaid dress styles, offered to help with the wedding, website even suggested planning a small sister's getaway to celebrate her engagement. Each time she brushed me off with a casual "Veronica's handling it," or a distracted "we'll see." It was like watching the door between us slowly close the gap, growing wider, no matter how hard I tried to wedge it open. The real dagger came weeks later, when I stopped by our parents' house to drop off a book for Dad. Mom was in the kitchen, phone in hand, scrolling through a WhatsApp group called Bianca's Dream Day. My name was nowhere to be seen, though every cousin and family friend seemed to be in it. "Oh, it's just for the wedding party," Mom said quickly, when she noticed me, staring, her voice too smooth, too practiced. "Nothing you need to worry about." But I did worry. I worried about the way Bianca's laughter no longer reached her eyes, about the way she flinched when I asked if she still wanted me at the dress fitting. Each small rejection piled on top of the last, a mountain of unspoken hurts that I carried alone. One night after another, ignored invitation, and another polite brush off, I confronted her on the phone, my voice shaking but determined. "Why are you shutting me out?" I asked, the words spilling out in a rush. Her response was cold and final. "This isn't about you, Isabella. You're making everything about yourself, and it's exhausting." That's when I realized she didn't see me as her anchor anymore. She saw me as an obstacle, a reminder of a past she was desperate to outgrow. If you've ever felt the sting of being replaced, of realizing someone you love no longer sees your worth, you're not alone. Share your stories in the comments, and if you're finding strength in these words, please subscribe for more. Your support means the world. The day I decided to walk away from Bianca's world was the day I decided to take my power back. After that final phone call, her accusing me of making everything about myself, while I sat in my dark apartment with tears streaming down my face, I realized I had been pouring all my energy into a relationship that only went one way. That night, I lay awake thinking about all the years I'd spent as her safety net, her secret keeper, the one who fixed every crisis and never asked for anything in return. But no more. When she cut me out of her wedding, she didn't just exclude me from a party, she cut me out of her life. The betrayal burned hot in my chest, but it also ignited something I hadn't felt in a long time. A quiet fury, a need to reclaim the parts of myself I'd buried under her needs. I decided then that if she didn't want me in her perfect day, I would plan a day that was just for me. I started small, searching for flights in the early hours of the morning, my laptop screen glowing like a beacon in the darkness. Iceland had always called to me with its stark beauty, its promise of solitude and renewal. As I scrolled through images of glaciers and black sand beaches, something inside me clicked. I booked the flights before I could talk myself out of it, a 10-day solo trip that would begin on the very day Bianca said I do. I didn't tell my family right away. Instead, I let the plans bloom in secret, like a tiny rebellion I held close to my chest. My suitcase became a symbol of my decision: waterproof boots instead of bridesmaid shoes, a down parka instead of a cocktail dress. I spent hours reading about Icelandic culture, learning phrases in the language that tasted foreign and exhilarating on my tongue. For the first time in years, I was doing something entirely for myself, and the freedom was intoxicating. I found a photographer's blog that offered tips for capturing the northern lights and bookmarked every article I could find on how to hike glaciers safely. Each new detail felt like a thread pulling me further from the guilt that had kept me tied to Bianca's world for so long. My family noticed the shift, of course. My mother, ever the keeper of appearances, called me into the kitchen one night. "Isabella?" she said, her voice tight with disbelief. "How can you even think of leaving when your sister needs you?" I met her gaze evenly for the first time in my life. "She doesn't need me," I said quietly. "She only wants me when it suits her. And I'm done with that." My mother's lips tightened, but she didn't argue. I could see the realization flicker in her eyes, the slow dawning that her eldest daughter was no longer the quiet fixer she'd always depended on. But the final piece of my decision came when I found the ultimate proof of Bianca's betrayal: an email she'd carelessly left open on my mother's computer while I was dropping off something at the house. It was to Lucas's sister Veronica, and it was full of cruel words about me, how I was too opinionated, how my style was quirky in a way that didn't fit the wedding's aesthetic, how they'd be better off without me there to ruin the mood. Reading those words was like a slap, but it also crystallized everything. This wasn't just about me being left out, it was about them erasing me entirely. So I decided to return the favor. Before I left for Iceland, I sent Bianca one last message: no anger, no accusation, just a link to an anonymous tip I discovered about Lucas's infidelity. A small final act of truth in a sea of lies. As I zipped up my suitcase, the weight that had lived in my chest for years finally lifted. I was done chasing after people who didn't see my worth. If you've ever felt like the black sheep in your own family, like the person who holds everyone else up while no one holds you, tell me in the comments. And if you're ready to reclaim your power, subscribe for more. Your voice deserves to be heard. I boarded the plane to Reykjavik with a calm resolve that had been missing from my life for far too long. As the aircraft climbed above the clouds, I felt the weight of my family's expectations melt away, replaced by a thrilling sense of possibility. Iceland had always been a dream, its raw landscapes of ice and fire, its promise of quiet solitude and a fresh start. Stepping off the plane into the brisk October air, I felt the sharp, clean scent of sulfur from the hot springs and a chill that cut straight through my coat, but somehow felt like it was cleansing my soul. My small hotel in the heart of the city was a cozy haven of warm blankets and wooden floors, a world away from the polite clinks of wedding toasts and the carefully curated perfection Bianca had chosen for herself. That first morning, I wandered the streets in a daze of wonder, my mind still tangled in memories of her betrayal, but also opening to something new. Reykjavik's colorful rooftops glowed under the pale autumn sun, and every corner of the city felt like a gentle invitation to start over. I wandered past the iconic Hallgrímskirkja church, its modernist spire cutting through the sky, like a promise of something different, something grander than family politics and stifled roles. My phone buzzed constantly with messages from back home, updates about the wedding plans I had been shut out of last-minute dramas that had once consumed me. But I ignored them all, choosing instead to focus on the present moment, on the simple joy of breathing in air that wasn't thick with expectation. I joined a Northern Lights tour that first night, bundled in layers of wool and anticipation. As we stood in the freezing darkness outside the city, the guide explained the science behind the shimmering lights, but I barely heard him. When the green and purple ribbons of light finally burst across the sky, I felt something inside me crack open. The beauty was so overwhelming, so unearthly, that tears spilled down my face before I even knew they were there. In that moment, I realized how small all those family dramas were compared to the vastness of this earth. Back at my hotel, I turned my phone back on for a brief moment just to see if the world had changed while I was away. It hadn't. The messages were the same demands for help questions about where I was, but no real concern for me beyond what I could provide. I turned it off again, sliding it into my backpack like it was just another item on my packing list. Each day in Iceland was a small act of reclaiming my life. I explored the Golden Circle, standing in awe at the thunderous power of Gullfoss waterfall and the boiling pools of Geyser. I met a retired Canadian professor who shared stories of ancient Icelandic sagas and reminded me that even the greatest heroes had to leave home to find themselves. When he spoke of the tectonic plates pulling apart beneath Thingvellir National Park, I thought of my own life, how sometimes distance wasn't a failure, but a chance for rebirth. I spent hours wandering black sand beaches, the waves crashing against basalt columns like ancient guardians. I let the cold winds whip around me, a cleansing force that carried away the last shreds of guilt I had carried for years. And as I stood on those shores, camera in hand, I realized that for the first time in so long, I was taking pictures just for me, not to document a moment for someone else, not to share with a sister who no longer cared, but simply to capture the world through my own eyes. Each photograph was a small testament to the life I was rebuilding from the ashes of the one I had left behind. If you've ever stood at the edge of something new, terrified and exhilarated in equal measure, let me know in the comments. And if you're ready to find your own light, subscribe for more stories that honor the messy, beautiful act of becoming. Each day in Iceland was a lesson in letting go and embracing the raw, unvarnished truth of my own worth. By the time I reached the icy blue expanse of Jökulsárlón Glacier Lagoon, I was no longer the woman who had once measured her value by how much she could sacrifice for her family. The towering icebergs shifting and glinting in the pale light seemed to whisper secrets about survival and resilience, secrets I had long forgotten. Standing there on the black sand, watching ancient ice drift slowly out to sea, I understood that some things are meant to melt away so that new things can take their place. That day, I joined a small group for an ice cave tour beneath the Vatnajökull Glacier, the largest in Europe. We pulled on crampons and helmets, our breath clouding in the cold air, and stepped into a cathedral of shimmering blue ice. The guide's voice echoed in the stillness, as he spoke of how these caves were always changing, forming and collapsing with the seasons. Nothing lasts forever, he said, his voice as calm and matter-of-fact as the ice itself. The words sank into me like a balm, a permission slip to release the shame and hurt I'd been clutching to my chest for years. Later that night, wrapped in a thick Icelandic duvet in my hotel room, I finally let myself feel the full weight of everything I'd left behind. My phone buzzed with updates from Home Panic about the wedding questions, about whether I would ever come back to help, but I ignored them. For the first time, I allowed myself to be completely present in my own life, unburdened by the constant expectation to fix and to please. And in that stillness, I realized something profound: my worth had never depended on how useful I was to others. My mother's thinly veiled criticism, my father's silent indifference, Bianca's need for me only when it suited her, all of it had kept me trapped in a role I had never chosen for myself. The next morning, I decided to spend the day hiking up to a hidden geothermal hot spring in the mountains, a place I'd read about in a local's travel blog. The trek was long and challenging, but each step felt like shedding another layer of old obligations. When I finally slipped into the warm, mineral-rich water, snowflakes drifting around me in the icy air, I felt an unfamiliar sense of peace settle in my bones. That night, as I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, I heard my mother's voice in my head again, always so quick to remind me of my duty to the family, to Bianca. But this time, instead of guilt, I felt a quiet resolve. I didn't owe anyone my constant sacrifice. If they could only see my worth when they needed something from me, then their love was never really love at all. The final piece of the puzzle fell into place when I received a voicemail from my mother, her voice uncharacteristically shaky. "Isabella," she said, "everything is falling apart here. We should have valued your help from the beginning. Please call us back." I played the message twice, listening to the way her words cracked under the weight of their own truth. They didn't miss me, they missed what I could do for them. That realization was both liberating and painful, like a wound finally allowed to breathe. In the end, I knew I didn't need to respond. My journey wasn't about proving my worth to them anymore. It was about finally seeing it for myself. If you've ever had to break free from the weight of other people's expectations, share your story in the comments. And if you're searching for the courage to choose yourself, subscribe to my channel. Together, we're learning that our value isn't measured by what we can fix for others, but by how fiercely we can stand in our own truth. When I finally returned to New York, I walked into my old apartment, feeling like a stranger in my own life, yet more myself than I had ever been. The art books stacked by my window, the half-finished sketches, the framed photos from Iceland's windswept beaches, they all spoke of the journey I'd taken, not just across an ocean, but into the depths of who I really was. My family, of course, was waiting. The post-wedding brunch at my parents' house was as tense as I'd imagined, polite conversation, covering over the raw wounds no one wanted to acknowledge. My mother's eyes flickered with something like relief, but also fear, like she wasn't sure how to treat this new version of me, who wouldn't automatically slip back into the role of fixer and peacemaker. Bianca's face was pale, her posture hesitant. When she finally spoke, her apology felt real, her voice cracking as she admitted that in her pursuit of the perfect day, she'd lost sight of the only person who had always stood by her. Her words were a beginning, not a fix. I knew that now. I told them calmly that I wouldn't be returning to my old patterns, no more last-minute rescue missions, or swallowing my voice just to keep the peace. My worth wasn't measured by how easily I could smooth over their chaos. This new chapter would be built on mutual respect, not silent self-sacrifice. As we sipped lukewarm coffee and stumbled through forced small talk, I found my eyes drifting to the framed family photos on the walls, realizing that while they told one story, I was finally ready to write my own. Later, alone in my apartment, I opened my laptop to plan another trip, this time to the cliffs of Ireland, drawn by the promise of wild waves and quiet cliffs. My heart felt steady and sure, no longer searching for validation in the hollow spaces of family approval. If you've ever had to walk away to truly find yourself, I'd love to hear your story in the comments. And if this journey of reclaiming self-worth resonates with you, please subscribe for more. Because the bravest thing we can ever do is to let go of who they expect us to be and finally live for ourselves. See you